A good afternoon to all our guests joining us here today. A gentle reminder to our guests to please make your way to your seats as the event will begin shortly. As this is an indoor event, I'll kindly request all guests to keep your masks on when not consuming any food or beverages. Thank you. For our virtual guests joining us via the Zoom webinar, please contact us through the Q&A function if you face any technical difficulties anytime throughout the session. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us this afternoon as we kick off the Singapore launch of the Doing Good Index 2022. We're excited to have guests joining us both here in Singapore and virtually. I'm Yuan Hao, and I'll be MC for today. The Doing Good Index is the flagship policy study of CAPS, the Center for Asian Philanthropy and Society, and for the 2022 survey, Empact was its local partner. The index presents robust information on what policies and practices can incentivize giving, and how they can foster a thriving and effective social sector. It provides a roadmap for how different stakeholders, such as individuals, companies, government agencies, and the social sector, can collaborate more effectively to meet society's needs. Today's launch event is co-hosted by CAPS and Empact. We will begin the session by sharing the key findings for Singapore from this study, following which we will move into a panel discussion where our panelists will lead a dialogue on the collaborative role of ecosystem partners in helping the social sector become more sustainable. There will be opportunities for a Q&A session for both the sharing and the panel discussion, which we encourage both our on-site and virtual guests to participate in. After we wrap up the day's events, we'd like to invite all our on-site guests to mingle and partake in the reception, a perk of in-person events that I'm sure many of us have long missed. So, without further ado, allow me to kick off this afternoon's events by inviting Mr. Peter Yang, founder and CEO of Empact, to share with us his opening remarks. He will be joining us today in a virtual capacity. Mr. Yang, please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to the Singapore launch of Doing Good Index 2022, DGI for short. I see many of the partners and friends join us today, and a few new ones. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Peter Yang. I'm the founder and CEO of Empact, a social enterprise with a mission to build a capacity for nonprofit organizations and social enterprises in APAC region. I'm working remotely at this moment and volunteering to build a mindfulness university in the US at the moment. Despite me can't join you physically, I would like to share a little bit of the context and say a few thank yous to start with. First of all, let me introduce our partner and co-host for today's event, the Center for Asian Philanthropy and Societies, CAPS for short. We have the CEO and co-founder of CAPS, Dr. Ruth Shapiro, who joined us physically with all of you. Ruth is probably one of the most knowledgeable person of the ecosystem in Asia. And I'm sure you guys are in a treat to benefit from her rich insights and knowledge. And she will be presenting the DGI findings later. Empact is really excited about this opportunity to partner with CAPS on the third edition, in fact, for the DGI. Right, just give you a little bit of context. This DGI, we have covered about 17 Asian economies. And we have heard from 239 nonprofit and social enterprises in the region, and we have interviewed 126 experts in the field, right? So Empact is extremely excited to do this because as a capacity builder, listening to our fellow nonprofit leaders and social entrepreneurs is the foundation of our work. So we are very grateful for this opportunity to hear from 81 of the leaders, ranging from those who are running social enterprises to nonprofit organizations, from those sized from no full-time staff rely on 100% volunteer to organizations with more than 1,000 staff, right? So the rich insights have allowed us to understand better what is the Singapore organization are facing and put Singapore's insights on the regional context, knowing what have we done well and what are the areas that we can learn from others. And hopefully today we can take these insights to take actions to help our fellow leaders in the outside Singapore, maybe export our knowledge as well. This year's DGI is extremely exciting because it is the first time it captured the impact or the leaders' view about COVID, right? What has COVID have brought to us, and what are some of the ways that we have learned or practiced to tackle the impact of COVID-19? Two themes came very much for me. One is really the story about sustainability, right? You may have heard nonprofit or social enterprise closed down during the pandemic. And on the other side, we also see a lot more cross-sector opportunities or cross-sector partnerships coming together to face or to meet the demands that are brought by COVID-19. That's the reason why today, after hearing from the voice from the nonprofit and social sector, we have invited the larger ecosystem to join us. We have many of you who are philanthropists, who are corporate foundations, and also government agencies who are instrumental for the social sector. After Dr. Ruth's sharing, we have invited the four very esteemed and knowledgeable panelists to join us to have a conversation about sustainability and about cross-sector collaboration. We have Ms. Claire Wong from DBS Foundation. We have Mr. Keith Stra, who wear many hats, but joining us from an individual philanthropist perspective. We have Dr. Fermin Diaz from NCSS, and we have Mr. Casey Tan from AIC. All of you, I had the opportunity to work with your organization, and thank you so much for accepting our invitation to be here today and to share your insights. For the audience, we have someone both online and in person, and I really hope you to take away the rich insights that will be shared today. Ask as many questions or challenging questions as you would like to the panelists. And most of all, I hope you take some insights back that would impact your organization. So enjoy and thank you.
Thank you, Vita, for that opening address. This afternoon, we have with us Dr. Ruth Shapiro, the founder and chief executive of CAPS, to share with us the findings for Singapore from the Doing Good Index 2022. As a research and advisory non-profit organization based in Hong Kong and working throughout Asia, CAPS is committed to producing world-class, evidence-based research to help philanthropists, government, and social delivery organizations maximize the positive impact of private social investment. Ruth's work in the philanthropic sector has brought us together here today in aspiring towards doing better and doing good for the region. Before I invite Ruth on stage, I'd like to briefly introduce everyone to the use of the online platform Pigeonhole Live, which all our guests, both physical and virtual, can submit your questions to. As we move into the Q&A session later on, simply scan the QR code that will be shown on screen. Ruth, please.
Good afternoon, everyone who's here and everyone who's online. I imagine there's millions of you out there. This is such a fascinating topic, and everyone cares about making the world better. I want to thank the Temasek Trust for making this beautiful venue available to us, and I want to thank our partner Empact for helping do all the on-the-ground logistics planning, and for being such a great partner in helping us collect the data for the Doing Good Index. As our terrific moderator just mentioned, CAPS, the Center for Asian Philanthropy and Society, is based in Hong Kong, but we work across 18 economies in Asia, so 16 countries, plus Hong Kong and Taiwan. And our mission is to increase both the quality and quantity of all types of private social investment going toward doing good. So we work in philanthropy and CSR and impact investing, blended finance, all the ways that we can mobilize private resources to making the world a better place. CAPS also has a unique premise. We are, despite me personally, I'm an American, we are based in Hong Kong. We are based in Asia. Our board is all from Asia. Our advisory board is from Asia. The majority of our donors are from Asia, and our work is very much based and situated in Asia. And it's really important because Asia, although it's a giant continent that is in no way monolithic, there are some really important trends and similarities that operate across the region. Our goal is to understand what works on the ground here in Asia. Now, of course, Singapore is not the same as Korea and not the same as India, but we look for common traits and trends. And so we're going to see a lot of that at play with the Doing Good Index. We want to know how to incentivize people, how to motivate them, and what resonates with them to make a world a better place. So with that, let me get to this Doing Good Index. I'm sorry, yeah. So the Doing Good Index is a regional view. As was just noted, I'm going to focus and include a lot of Singapore statistics and specifics. That's a hard alliteration to say. But there is a regional context. Those of you who are here have a hard copy. Those of you who are online, it's all available on our website. And for everyone, we have a really terrific microsite that allows you to not only compare economies, so Singapore to Hong Kong, who would ever make that comparison? But you can on our microsite, or you can compare 2020 to 2022. We started this index in 2018, but the questions were a little bit different, so the comparison is for 2020, 2022. The microsite is really fun to play with, so I encourage everyone to go there. All right. I think it goes without saying that although we are coming to the end of the pandemic, we are not at the end of the pandemic. And those of us here, except for me, now I'm not wearing a mask. And we're not there yet. We haven't come out of it yet. But we do know that during this time, disparities across the region have increased. COVID did not bring any new trends in, but it accelerated existing trends. Some of them good, the use of technology, the way local communities came together. Many of them bad, including disparities in income, in education, in access to social benefits. All of those disparities increased. One of the reasons we do the Doing Good Index is to figure out how to do our work better. And in fact, all of our studies look to ways to do our work better. I don't think anyone would question we need to improve how we fix the world. We have a lot of challenges, and we need to work together to address them. The Doing Good Index and our other studies helped us to find that path. So as I said, we need to work more effectively and efficiently together. Everyone talks about collaboration, but all of us, I'm sure, in this sector know easier said than done. We also know that there is, across the region, a widespread trust deficit. And what do I mean by that? Well, when I was doing the feasibility study for CAPS, I went around and asked a lot of high net worth and ultra high net worth people, why don't you give more locally? And surprisingly, although I interviewed close to 75 people, all of them, whether they were in Japan or Singapore or Pakistan, gave me one answer the same, which was, we don't trust the local organizations to receive our money. Trust is a big problem. And trust, the trust deficit goes all the way around. People don't trust nonprofits, social delivery organizations. Some of those nonprofits don't trust government. Some governments don't trust companies. Companies don't trust government. And this is very debilitating. We need to figure out how to build trust. And one way to build trust is more daylight, right? You know the saying that daylight is the best antiseptic. The best way to clean is to allow more accountability and transparency, and to put in place systems that allow accountability and transparency to be the norm. So the Doing Good Index is really meant to do that, to take a systemic approach and say, what are the policies and programs that build trust, that increase accountability and transparency? There are three groups of findings that we want to talk about. We want to mitigate the trust deficit, we want to leverage local support, and we want to facilitate cross-sector collaboration. And this, the Doing Good Index and our other work help us to understand just doing that. So let me get into some of the details. What is it, first of all? As we just heard, it covers 17 economies. In 2020, we covered 18, but Myanmar was not able to fully participate this year for obvious reasons. But there is a section on what's happening in Myanmar, and I will just say, I'm sure we would all agree that our hearts go out to the people in that country and hope that things improve and that they can participate in DGI 2024. The CAPS is a relatively small organization. We couldn't do our work without partners work on the ground, working with us throughout the region. In Singapore, our partner is Empact. In the past, we worked with the Singapore Management University as well. We have partners in each of the 17 economies, and they help send out our survey and get it answered, which is no mean feat, because our survey takes 45 to 60 minutes to fill out. It's quite comprehensive. It's the most robust study of its kind in the world. And they also convene experts, because sometimes the rules are really hard to understand. That's less true in Singapore, as you'll see on an upcoming slide, but in other places, people have tried, for example, to explain to me the tax code in Nepal, and afterwards I just felt like I needed a drink. I couldn't understand it at all. So it's not that easy to understand some of these rules, and so the experts help us to understand what are the rules and with certainty. And together, the answers from the nonprofits, social delivery organizations, and the experts formulate the data for the index. Oh, and let me just say, there are 4 sets of indicators. 3 of them have to do with government: regulations, tax and fiscal policies, and procurement policies, which I'll discuss in greater detail later. Ecosystem really refers to how much does the society embrace private social investment? How much do companies and individuals and universities really think about these issues? How much do local organizations coalesce around solving problems together? That's what the ecosystem tends to look at. Okay. So this is the index. I want to just say this is not a league table. These clusters are alphabetically listed, and Singapore does very well. So why does Singapore and Taiwan do well? Because as you move toward doing well in this index, it really indicates the societal support for the social sector. How much is the social sector viewed by government and by companies to be a really important and necessary partner to addressing social challenges? And in Singapore, the social sector is embraced through regulations, through policies, and through action. The other countries, it's a mixed bag, and I'm going to get into some of the details, and I'm happy to answer any questions about this in the Q&A section. Okay. We ask those 4 sets of indicators, but this time, of course, we ask questions about the impact of COVID. When we decided to include COVID, we assumed that we would be looking at COVID in the rearview mirror. Little did we know that we'd still be in the midst of this pandemic. And those of you know I'm based in Hong Kong, which means I'm looking at a required hotel quarantine when I go back, unfortunately, which is why many people from Hong Kong are moving to Singapore and driving your prices up. Sorry, on my fellow community's behalf. Okay, so we call them social delivery organizations, and let me just point out why. Many nonprofits actually have a for-profit stream, or they're social enterprises that are for-profit. So not-profit doesn't really work when you're talking about for-profit activities. NGO doesn't really work because in Asia there's a lot of GOs, government-linked organizations. So we use the term social delivery organization to kind of cut across all of that and include all these different types of organizations that are on the front lines of doing good. We know that during COVID, most of these organizations had to pivot in order to really meet the needs of the community, and they couldn't necessarily carry on with business as usual. Singapore is about average for Asia in that 52% said that they directly supported COVID relief efforts. And of course, many of you know, these are often with the most vulnerable populations who need this kind of help. 47% saw an increased demand in their services and products. 49% saw their income increase. And unfortunately, 38% saw their income decrease. Now, this is across the region. One of the issues with COVID is that a lot of funding became zero-sum. So many foundations and corporations also spent money to help, but they took money from existing programs and gave it to COVID relief or efforts, which meant that the organizations who were doing the work in education or other types of healthcare or environment were left a little bit amiss. They were left out. Also, although this is not so true for Singapore, in emerging markets, foreign funding into those has been decreasing and in a big way. And I'm happy to answer questions about foreign funding in emerging in the economies in Asia if there's interest during the Q&A. So what do we know? That in some ways, COVID has helped strengthen the idea that the social sector is important. And look what happened in Singapore. When there were clusters of outbreaks in the immigrant community, it was the nonprofits who had the experience, the relationships, and had been working with those communities who were really best suited to go in. And to its credit, the government of Singapore turned to those organizations to help them deal with those populations. That happened throughout the region. And it's very good that 64% of the organizations in Singapore feel optimistic about the future. Of course, they need more money, they need more staff, and we want to collaborate more. And I think all of those can be addressed in the panel discussion. What's happening across Asia is a changing funding landscape. And let me just say, you can see foreign money into Singapore is not really necessary or important. It is in a country like the Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, that has relied much more on foreign money. But even the small amount that came into Singapore went away. In that, we can also see that the notion that people think that that domestic funding is low is still going on. It went from 83% down a little bit in 2022. And when we asked why is local support going down, people say either they want to give directly to beneficiaries or they don't feel it's their responsibility. And these are the top two reasons from Singapore specifically. So what does Singapore do well? Well, the list goes on forever, of course, but we're talking about within the Doing Good Index. So first of all, the laws are generally understood and enforced. So in Singapore, as you can see, 24% of the respondents say that laws are easy to understand. That is not the case in a lot of Asian economies. And that no one will be surprised to know that the Singapore government is pretty good about enforcing the laws that it has. So it's a high percentage. So Singapore does well of thinking of rational policies, explaining them, and enforcing them. Some of those policies are that the number of clearances here to incorporate as a tax-exempt organization requires 3 clearances when the Asia average is 2. But the days required to actually incorporate as a tax-exempt organization is long here. And I think that we all know in Singapore the vetting of these organizations to make sure that they're really entitled to receive that tax-exempt status is taken very seriously by the government. We also know that Singapore has the highest tax subsidies for charitable giving in the world, at 250%, with 100% eligible for that amount, both for individuals and corporations. One of the things that's really, I think, a little bit hard to understand, certainly I don't, is that 100% is the norm for a lot of other economies, and you can see that, but they cap the amount eligible for that. Now, for a corporation, I can understand. You don't want the company to go out of business. But for an individual, why cap it? If somebody wants to give their money away, why not help them to do it? So that cap, what it does is it sends a mixed message. One of the things that's really true in Asia is that people pay attention to government. It's not so much the tax incentives. Sure, they're great. But the tax base in Singapore is low. So why do it? It's a way for the government to signal that we're putting our money where our mouth is. We think that engagement in this kind of charitable giving is important, and we want people to engage this way. So when a government says, sure, we'll give you a 100% tax break, but only on 2% or 12% or 10% of what you give, it sends somewhat of a mixed message to those in other economies. Of course, Singapore, it's 100%. It's 250% and up to 100%. So it's the most generous in the world. The other thing that Singapore does is it lives up to its name of kind of Singapore Inc. The government and the social sector work well together here. There's more collaboration here than almost any other place, and that's terrific. SDOs receiving government grants, 80% in Singapore. Now, I'm going to talk about procurement. Grants are one thing. Government procuring the services from these organizations is something else. And we actually think procurement is really important because it legitimizes the sector. But you can see that 80% of the respondents get government grants, which is the highest in Asia, and that it makes up about 1/3 of the budgets of these organizations, which is double the Asia average. Procurement, though, it's not quite the same. So 44% get government procurement contracts, and that's good. It's higher than the Asia average, but there's an opportunity to do more there. And what procurement does is it signals to everyone that the government believes in these organizations, legitimizes them, and gives them a sustainable income stream. For Singapore, you can see that the procurement contracts on average account for about 7% of an SDO's budget. Government engagement is a win-win. So Singapore is one of the 4 economies out of 17 that has a government-sponsored National Giving Day. We think National Giving Days are terrific, Because once again, it legitimizes this kind of activity and it creates a buzz and an excitement. And now there's a lot of efforts. Giving Tuesday, Tencent in China has a huge giving day that's promulgated by them with government support. Giving days are good, and Singapore is one of the 4 that has a national one. Also in Singapore, 70% of organizations are involved in policy consultation with government, and 92% reported being influenced by what the government priorities are. Now, in Asia, as we said, government looms large, and philanthropists tend not to want to give to organizations that are critiquing the government, because they want to continue to work with the government. So we often tell governments, why don't you allow organizations and philanthropy to flow, because it tends to go toward those issues and those priorities that you share. Singapore also does well in terms of corporate involvement, and I know there are some company representatives here today. 85% believe that companies are supportive of the social sector, and you can see that 69% receive corporate funding. Volunteers are also really important, and 69% have corporate volunteers. I think we have some people involved with corporate volunteering here today. I have some statistics about that. 69% of SDOs work with volunteers, which is up from 67% in 2020. The Asia average is 53. I think that you may know that in 2016, the government led the way by giving civil servants a half a day a year to do volunteer work, and many companies followed suit on that. What's not as well understood is what type of volunteering is being done. Many people think that a good volunteer initiative to clean up a river or paint a school or do something like that, which is fine and good, but a lot of SDOs are looking for help with legal help, accounting help, tech help, and that kind of volunteering is very important and needs to be increased. These are the top 3 ways that corporates can support SDOs: funding, technical support, and donation of products and services. Okay, so what can Singapore be doing better? Talent. This is a country where, the unemployment rate is low, people have a lot of employment choices, so who goes and works for the nonprofit sector, for the social sector? It's tough for organizations to maintain talent. 2, we need to build capacity and integrate technology more. And we need to, even though collaborations are doing well, they could be doing a little bit better. And let me give you some statistics. Attracting and retaining talent, 62% of organizations here say that it's difficult to recruit and retain talent, partially because people believe that nonprofit staff should earn less. They believe that because nonprofit staff do in fact earn less. And this is a country where government officials make equivalent salaries to the private sector, but somehow the social sector gets left out of that thinking. So I'm all about paying people a fair wage to do work in the social sector, and I think many of us in this room would agree. I just also want to talk about capacity building and the incorporation of technology. One of our panelists just now, Keith Chua, told me that the computer science department has become the center for, he can give me mention the right name, but essentially has brought on philanthropy as a key part of computer science, using technology to do good. And I know I just didn't explain it fully enough, but maybe you can when you're on the panel, Keith. It's very exciting what technology can do, and Singapore is very much a leader, not just in Asia, but around the world in utilizing technology to do good. And we all applaud you, and we look for more leadership in that regard. And I think this new center at NUS is a way to move forward in doing that. Obviously, during COVID, more of these organizations use technology, and now about a third of them crowdfund, more intend to crowdfund. So, and collaboration. Pre-COVID, 79% of the organizations collaborated, and in addition to that, 58% entered into new collaborations during the pandemic. And they obviously collaborated with government, with corporations, and with other SDOs. So that's an overview of the findings for Singapore, and now I'm very happy to take some questions. And I see one. Please do send me questions. I think we have a little bit of time left, so okay, I see people getting the QR code. I do have a doctorate. Give me really hard questions. Let's see if my Stanford pedigree really paid off. Okay, so the first question is, what are some examples of social sector working with government or corporates that you can point to in the region? Well, actually, CAPS did a study on public-private partnerships for social good. You know, a lot of nonprofits or social delivery organizations really don't, they may have hearts of gold, but they don't have really significant business rigor, and they don't know how to bring business thinking into their work. So some ways that organizations can work together is to really partner with companies working with nonprofits or social delivery to help them with the skills that we just talked about: accounting, financial management, marketing. All organizations need that kind of assistance. But let me give you some examples of what I think are really excellent public-private partnerships for social good. In the Philippines, which you know is unfortunately the recipient of every type of climate change disaster that can happen in the world, except an avalanche, I suppose. Every time there was another typhoon, another earthquake, it was just a mess. And the government couldn't handle all of these natural disasters. So many companies worked together to create the Philippine Disaster Resilience Foundation, which essentially says, you, Ayala Group, you're good and you're specifically knowledgeable about this area. You, Aboitis, are good and knowledgeable about this area. And they brought a rational kind of divvying up of the work and the process to the mix. That's really important in a country like the Philippines, where the government does not have the wherewithal to step forward. Let me give you another example from the region. Thai Bev, which is a giant conglomerate in Thailand, realized that farmers weren't really growing enough organic fruits and vegetables. And they also realized that sick people were were in hospitals and eating really bad food. And it's a joke, right? What food is available in hospitals? So what did Thai Bev do? They created a social enterprise where food would be contracted from farmers around the country and sold to hospital cafeterias so that they'd have fresh produce to be able to feed to the sick people, which helps them get better. That's a great example of kind of corporations, local government, and companies, local organizations working together. There are many more, which I'd be very happy to share with you, but let me go on to another question. Okay, did this come up? No? Yes? No? It's not changing. This question is, now they're all up. Okay, well now you can see all of them. What can be done to change the public opinion that people who work in the NGO sector should be paid less? Well, I'm doing my best right now. I think that one of my board members has this kind of cute but tough saying, which is, if you pay people peanuts, you get monkeys. I think that there's a growing recognition that people in the social sector are talented professionals, and this is especially changing as young people choose to work in public service more and more. And so I think this notion that people who work for nonprofits and social enterprises can't make a living is starting to change, but we need to advocate for it. Okay. Question is, must it always be direct aid? Are there innovative funding models you can share? Absolutely. In fact, we did a study on blended finance, which is available on our website. So what's exciting and has been really happening over the past 25 or 30 years particularly is using kind of private sector capital and profit to a certain extent to do good, right? This manifests itself in impact investing, it manifests itself in social impact bonds, in development impact bonds. There's a lot of experimentation happening. So when 30 years ago, there was nonprofit on one side with philanthropy and for-profit investments on the other side and nothing in between. Now there's so many different types of funding mechanisms, and I think we all know about a number of them. And this report that we did highlights a number of these activities called blended finance. It's on our website. Are there any trends you see influencing NGOs and philanthropists in the next few years? Yes. One, I think that partially due to government requirements and partially due to the lack of foreign funding coming into the region, there is increased emphasis on local, local, local. Philanthropists like to give locally. They tend not to want to send their money out, and that is especially true in emerging markets. Japan is the exception. They do fund outside of the region, outside of Japan, but throughout Asia, it tends to be really locally driven. Two is the interest in social enterprise and impact investing, and three, increased interest in environment, in using CSR and sustainability to address climate change and environmental degradation. And let me just say a fourth one. You know, in Asia still, a lot of families are dominated by either the, a lot of corporations are dominated by either the family or the state. And so what you see is a merger between their personal philanthropy, their CSR, their business development, and their R&D. And so I think that as companies are being called upon more and more to address societal challenges, you're going to see even more experimentation, innovation about using money, and also merging of the lines between the private sector, government, and the social sector. All of us are working together to do better, to make the world cleaner, healthier, better educated, and that is only going to increase. So I suppose that that's a good, even though there are more questions, which I'm happy to write answers to later if they give me the writer of these, but it's a good positive message to end on, and so I want to thank you again very much.
Thank you, Ruth, for that insightful presentation. To further some of these insights that we have gathered so far, we will now be proceeding with our panel discussion, where our panelists will explore the issue of sustainability in Singapore's social sector and how collaborative efforts amongst philanthropists, companies, and social service organizations can play a key role in realizing that goal. Before we proceed with the panel, I'd just like to briefly remind everyone on the use of the Pigeonhole Live platform, We will be displaying a new QR code later on screen and would like to encourage all our physical and virtual guests to submit your questions via that link. The panelists will be addressing these questions during the Q&A session. For our panel today, we're excited to have with us Mr. Keith Chua, the trustee for the Mrs. Lee Choon Guan Trust Fund. He sits on the boards of several social sector organizations and is a former board member of the National Council of Social Service. He's also the executive chairman of ABR Holdings Limited, which was recognized as a champion of good by the National Volunteer and Philanthropy Centre in 2017, 2018, and 2020. We also have Ms. Claire Wong, the executive director and head of the DBS Foundation Business for Impact chapter, whose work has been holding a torch for social entrepreneurship here in Asia. Prior to this role, she spent more than 15 years in the energy industry and in government policy. Mr. Tan Kwang Chek, or KC, the Chief Executive Officer of AIC, the Agency for Integrated Care. His work experience spans over 2 decades in the public, private, and non-profit sectors. He spent more than a decade serving the public sector in various appointments and agencies before moving on to the labor movement and private sector. Dr. Fermin Diaz, the Deputy CEO and Group Director, Human Capital and Organization Development Group of the National Council of Social Service. Having rich experience in human resources, he has held consulting, corporate, and academic roles in organizations worldwide. And last but not least, our moderator, Mr. Yap Keng Hui, the Deputy CEO of Impact. May I please invite our panelists to come up on stage. Over to you, Keng Hui.
Thanks everyone. Fellow panel members, I think you can remove your mask on stage. And later in the photo taking, we can still remain unmasked. But after that, I'll request that everyone mask up again. Yeah, thank you. All right. Thanks everyone. And thanks everyone for still staying around. I hope you'll benefit a lot as well from the panel sharing as what Ruth has shared just now on the Doing Good Index. And I warmly welcome everyone again in this beautiful venue, the Temasek Shop House, and those who have joined us virtually. Yep. Today we are very, very glad to have with us giants from the philanthropy and the social service sector. Right? And I really hope that every one of us will benefit from their in-person sharing of their own experiences and their perspective on a few topics that we would like to discuss today, namely the issue of sustainability, which was highlighted just now as well. Yep. And that's what Peter has been saying at the welcome address. We hope that you ask the difficult questions, and I think the pigeonhole system should be coming up soon. We'll be opening that up as well. So as you hear some of the sharing, do start posting your questions, and I will try my best to go through the pigeonhole system to bring out your questions for any of the panelists or all of them. Yep. So for the next 70 minutes, I'm hoping to maybe start off by getting each of our panel members to introduce yourself and your role in the philanthropy or the social service sector, and perhaps also to get your view on what is that single biggest change in our Singapore social service sector in the past 2 years. Yeah. Can I have one of you to start first? Maybe Claire?
Sure, ladies first. Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Claire and I head up the DBS Foundation, specifically the Business for Impact chapter. I think this year one of the significant things that we've done at the bank is the bank has committed an additional amount of $100 million towards growing the DBS Foundation as well as other philanthropic areas. So we're actually creating a new chapter of the foundation as well, which is called the Community Impact chapter. But I guess the part that we've been focused on the last 8 years has been on businesses for impact or social enterprises. So I guess in line with that, to your question of what's the one thing that we've seen, I think in the last 2 years, one change I would say. I guess I stick out here because in a way I'm not like part of the social service sector per se, but I do think that that's what's also changed, which is that I do think that there is a growing awareness and view that businesses should also be a part of creating impact. And I think that's what we champion as well, and we've definitely seen, I think, that grow because, I think for better or worse, I think with the growth of technology, and social media and so on, corporates need to care about what people think of them, right? What do your stakeholders think of you as an organization? Not just in making more money, but how are you creating an impact, especially with COVID and with all the political uncertainty and all the crazy things that are happening in our world today. I think corporates have a huge role to play in creating an impact, and I think there's growing awareness and acceptance of that as well in the last couple of years. So, yeah, it's me.
Thanks. Yeah. Anybody else wants to first?
I'm happy to
Thank you.
try and follow Claire. Just by way of some background, I would say that my starting point in, I guess, doing good and getting involved in the social sector began very strongly on a faith-based approach, and that goes back to my younger years when I was still young in business, and from there, my engagement through the church and the community service organizations related to the church. I volunteered, coming from a business background, to help in fundraising. So I had my first engagement in the area of fundraising, and I was fortunate to be mentored by a couple of individuals who, at that point in time, were very key fundraisers in the charity sector. So I had my first lessons there. And as I worked through the fundraising path, I got more involved and more engaged in the work. And in one particular area was in mental health services, that our organization was one of the larger not-for-profit service providers then. And there were not many other service providers in the not-for-profit area in mental health services. It then moved progressively into the area and interest in philanthropy, social entrepreneurship. So that's my background, and I have been fortunate to be engaged with several groups, individuals. I also had a good stint with Community Foundation as well, and I really feel that I really treasure the opportunity there in CSS. Perhaps for me, what stands out if we talk about the last 2 years, I think essentially we're talking about the COVID phase. And what I saw, from a business perspective, I'm involved in the food and beverage industry that's one of my key areas of engagement. And in the early stages of COVID, I mean, we had some very basic needs emerging in our society, including just the basic need of having meals. And we saw, now food and beverage, as you know, is one of the harder hit sectors of our economy in the early phases of COVID. But despite the financial challenges, we had individuals stepping forward, many who just were willing to provide free meals for those who had difficulty in finding meals. And essentially, I think what that was showing is that our community was coming together, individuals and smaller groups, without having to be told, without having to be invited or coordinated. And to me, I think that's a trend that I believe we should be. I think that will change. That will be significant, I think, for our social service sector moving forward. If we can continue to harness this approach from the individual. I agree with Claire totally about the business sector, which I may touch on a little bit later, but I think among the individuals in our community, so many who have stepped forward voluntarily, spontaneously, to respond to the needs of the time, the needs of the day. And so, in the same way that we advocate for businesses, that all businesses will ultimately see themselves as social businesses, I see the potential of a blurring of the lines between an individual participating and contributing to work related to the social sector and organized work, I guess, that we now see in the social sector. And I think that bodes well for our community, for our society, because it will ultimately bring us to be a more caring, a more compassionate society in the years ahead. So I hope we don't lose this as we emerge from this pandemic and as we move forward.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Kwan Chek. I'm the head of the Agency for Integrated Care, which is an agency under the Ministry of Health, really focusing and empowering our Singaporeans, and in particular seniors, to be able to live and age well in the community and at home. So we do work very closely with our partners in the community care sector, focusing on providing home care, center-based care, social areas, as well as residential care to really help our Singaporeans be able to age in the community. So we do work closely with what has been called the social delivery organization, but in our context, either social service agencies or social enterprises, really focusing on the area that I mentioned is under our ambit. On the specific question that was asked in terms of the single larger change that I see, from my perspective, maybe firstly I would agree with what Ruth mentioned. I think many of the key trends, I won't say many, the key trends that we see are already there. And I think exacerbated by COVID-19. But I think it's also important that we see also acceleration, whether focus in terms of clients' needs, right? Identifying where they are and where the vulnerable, for example, seniors are. How do we care for them and deliver the care to them where they are at home in the community? But for me, I think really the adoption of technology or digitalization, again, not new. I think something that the sectors across have been adopting. But in particular for our sector, I see an increase and higher sort of willingness, but adoption of digital technology, both to be able to transform the way that we deliver care, to be able to engage, reach out to those who may not be able to. And in particular, I think during the circuit breaker period in Singapore, using technology to be able to do so, but also focusing on changing the way that we operate, our productivity, our efficiency, being able to actually adopt new models going ahead. So in our context, whether it's the use of tele or video consultations for rehab activities, using technology to keep our seniors safe at home rather than for them to be admitted to our nursing homes. Using technology such as robotics to increase productivity, but actually to be able to engage, keep our seniors active and healthy. I think are just some of the areas that I see increasing trend in terms of our partners adopting them, being willing, but also being open and wanting to incorporate and integrate this as part of their strategy, their focus, and their business model going ahead. So to me, it's a trend that's important, and we need to continue to support this. And one of the key areas that AIC is also focusing on for our partners. Thank you.
Oh, hello, I'm Fermin Diaz. I'm one of those active senior citizens that Casey looks after. I'm also a deputy CEO, one of the deputy CEOs at NCSS. And what we do at NCSS overall is to try to make sure that all of the service sector agencies are capable of delivering all the services to the clients to the best quality and in the most efficient way possible. So in many ways, we share a lot of the goals that AIC has, and we work together in many aspects. Digitalization, of course, in the last 2 years has been the greatest thing that came out of COVID. For us, blessing in disguise, in the sense that it was very hard to try to convince agencies, particularly board members of agencies, to invest in IT, to invest in digitalizing. And to be fair, it was also very difficult to convince some of the staff that services could be provided online. COVID made the point moot. It had to be done. Investments had to be made. Services had to be delivered. And now we live in a post-COVID sort of, well, maybe not post-COVID yet, in the continuing COVID kind of when will it ever end mindset. But the whole digitalization train has definitely left the station, and we're on it already. Besides that, there's one other big aspect that came out of COVID that we're still struggling with, and that is the mental health of both the clients and the staff. That has taken a toll on everybody. In particular, we look after, the agencies look after their clients, but we look after their staff. So we've done a lot to help to do that, from implementing employee assistance programs and subsidizing in every agency, to making sure that we have the capability to look after burnout and other related issues. So HR policies, which heretofore sort of got second fiddle, have also become quite important, because without capable staff who are there, present and mindful, we cannot deliver services to clients. So it's a combination of the very hard IT type of environment with the very soft, let's ensure mental health is looked after.
Yeah, thanks everyone. I think just what I'm hearing too, I mean, it's very heartening to hear that corporates has also stepped up, right, during our times of need, during the pandemic. We're also seeing a lot of ground-up movements, as what Keith has shared, and I attest to that. A lot of young people especially has come up on their own, right, to support the needs of the community, right? And of course, what we are hearing from both our agency partners here is that not just the hard digital transformation that we are pushing for, and COVID bringing that up into the forefront, but also the softer aspects of taking care of the mental health of our staff who are caring for our beneficiaries in the community. I think that's most important. If not, the burnout is real, and we are seeing the great resignation currently, right? Yep. I just want to check whether everyone is looking at, or have you all registered for the pigeonhole yet, and start your questions rolling, right? I think we are going to show the QR code. There you go, right? The QR code on the screen. You can. This is a new one, a different one from the Q&A pigeonhole for Ruth just now. So do scan it again, and you can start posting your questions. And if you have questions specific to one of the panel members, do indicate so. For who? For Keith, for Claire, for Casey, or for Fermin. Yeah, and then I'll pick those up, and then we'll direct it for you. Okay? Yep. If not, let me just get this panel session started, a little bit warm up. I'll ask each of our panel members a quick question, and then I'll proceed to pick some questions from the pigeonhole system, right, while you all are typing in your questions as well. Yeah. The first one, I think I would like to direct it to Keith. Yeah. Keith, for yourself as a philanthropist and a trustee for the Mrs. Lee Choon Guan Trust Fund, right, and I understand that your giving has been largely towards education and healthcare as well. Right. The question then is, in your experience working with organizations in this sector, right, what, in your opinion, is the most critical sustainability challenge for these organizations? Right. If I can define what sustainability is for everyone, in person here and online virtually, I know for us a very fashionable sustainability is related to ESG for the most part, right? But here we want to take on the definition that's been predefined by the Doing Good Index, that sustainability here, we're referring to the capacity of a social organization to continue operating and delivering social impact in the long term. Yep, so we're talking a little bit different on sustainability here. Yep, so Keith, back to you again. So what is that most critical sustainability challenge for organizations you work with in the healthcare education sector? And how have you been helping to address that challenge yourself? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for, I guess, framing it such that we have clear, in a sense, a reference point for the definition of the word sustainability, because by itself, I think it can suggest quite a broad interpretation. But I think we do need to look at it in the context that sustainability has been a core challenge for not-for-profits. I mean, as long as we know, and the key areas that tend to crop up in terms of sustainability would be, and it's also appeared in the findings there, is funding, talent, and in our own experience, capacity building, which has also been mentioned. And then I think what was also mentioned in the study is the cross-sector collaboration. Well, as we know that, getting an initiative off the ground does require a certain amount of planning, is a challenging stage, because you have to build trust, you have to build credibility, you have to raise funds, and then you've got to get the work going. I think quite often in the early stage of building it up, it is counterbalanced, despite maybe the lack of some of these aspects of whether it's funding or whether it's talent. It is compensated by drive and passion. So you have, whether it's an individual or a team that drives this initiative and gets it going. When we were running the Asia Center for Social Entrepreneurship and Philanthropy at the Business School until 2019, we did a program in terms of tracking these initiatives and startups. And we went and looked a little bit closely and identified that the 3-year mark tends to be a point where challenges begin to set in, because by that time your work is underway, you've got the work going, you've got beneficiaries, you've probably got emotional attachment to your work, you're beginning to demonstrate some track record, but you're still in the process of trying to move it to the next stage, and that could be scaling up, it could be deepening, it could be deepening the work that you're engaged in and trying to do. And we termed this crossing the chasm, and we put a little bit more effort into studying this and engaged both the students and the academics in finding ways in which organizations can be looking to prepare themselves and work to getting past this. And it's not, I guess the research was not complete to the sense that we can say, yes, this is fact or not. But I think it probably does affect quite a good number of organizations in getting past this. And once you get past this, you tend to be able to stabilize and move on, and then from there, move forward and build. But very much depends, I think, as you go through this stage, it does very much depend on the the input and the support of the various stakeholders. I mean, first of all, the team that's driving it, the funders that are supporting it, the beneficiaries that are receiving, the ability to if you need to build a team, the ability to hold that team together and stay focused. The other thing that we found is that there is also the possibility of what we may call mission creep, where you may tend to move a little bit away, or in some cases maybe even quite significantly away from the original focus and the original vision that the work was intended to. So these are some of the things that we came up with and put it into some papers that we are hopeful that these will be helpful for the organizations, especially those that are starting up. Now, where we then took it, or we took it in terms of application, as you mentioned. What did we do, and what did we do? Well, first of all, in terms of our funding approach, and this is the approach that we took. We have worked on a 5-year funding model to give a little bit longer runway for the initiative to stabilize, mature, and to show value. I use the word value. We can use the word social impact. I prefer the word value. It's lighter in a sense, and it may give a little bit more breadth to whether, and allow. In a sense, I think in the end, whether you feel that an initiative works or is adding value to society, I think there will be the element of subjectivity when it comes to you can't measure everything, you can't quantify everything. So the value approach, I think, allows some degree of individualization, I guess. I think what's value to one supporter, one donor may be different to another. And I think it's fine because we have a very, the sector remains varied and very often, individuals and perhaps teams or families give to more specific needs that they feel attached or linked to for different reasons. So one is that we looked at a 5-year timeline as part of that. Second example I would give is that in order for sustainability, we found that the area of capacity building within organizations became quite a key aspect. And here, what I ended up getting involved with a few other friends is we set up a collaborative philanthropic initiative. We came together, we pooled our resources, our time and our talents. We came from different backgrounds. We had a bank, we had bankers, we had IT person, we had we had banker, IT. Sorry, there was one more, and then there was myself I call myself an entrepreneur. And so we pooled our resources, and then we engaged with the organizations or identified organizations that would benefit from a capacity building plan. And we it was a combination of funding, it was a combination of walking with them and providing input and seeing it through. And typically we looked at a 3-year engagement to see how that would help that organization. But in both instances, I would just like to conclude by saying that we kept touch. I think it's important to keep touch with the work that we're doing, but we don't want to micromanage. I think that we felt that was also key, that we do not interfere with the vision and the direction of the group that we're engaging with. May I just take a minute just to mention what Bruce had said about this new center that we worked with NUS. It's at the School of Computing, and we launched it officially last year. The Center of Computing for Social Good and Philanthropy. And the focus, it basically was a continuation of ASAP that we did with Business School, and we've now continued that partnership with the School of Computing. It engages students in projects that would use their computing and digitalization skills for purposes of doing good. And there was some initial work that was done to help in COVID, during the time of COVID. And just on philanthropy, my hope is this. We've seen that the online giving has been a helpful way has been helpful during the COVID period. But I see more that online giving, more that can be done, and basically looking to find ways that we can encourage giving. And really, I think online giving can be an avenue that would allow the whole of society to be able to participate. And we can include in that online giving, not just in terms of resources, but in terms of time and talent as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Keith. I just want to quickly switch over to Claire. Claire, for DBS Foundation is among the leading corporate philanthropies in Singapore and Asia, and one of your grant programs that we Impact work quite closely with, right, supporting social enterprises in this region, right, has been providing funds to help social enterprises grow their social impact across a variety of themes such as climate change, food security, reducing social inequalities and promoting good health and well-being. Right? The question then is, could you share some examples of how the foundation has, as a funder, has been building the capacities of these social enterprises to help them succeed in the long term? Thanks.
Sure. So I think for us, so what DBS Foundation does is, 8 years ago we decided, I think we wanted to really focus on an area that, in a way, the bank, as DBS Bank, we can actually come behind and support, where we can lend our skills, expertise, and all of that to really support an area. And I think that's why when we're thinking about areas we could support, we then decided to focus on social entrepreneurship, because it is about building up, businesses with an impact. And of course, 8 years ago, that was probably a more foreign concept than it is today. And that's why, one of the key pillars of what we do is what we call integrate, which is it's important for us, for what we do at the foundation, to actually integrate with the bank. I think there are different ways that different foundations work. For us, the very genesis of it was very much about how can we bring the skills and expertise of the bank to bear, whether it's, through our products and services for the social entrepreneurs and so on. So building capacity is a very key part of what we do. So it starts with, yes, we do have a grant program that we run. Every year we give out, last year we gave out about $3 million to about 19 social enterprises. So funding is just the starting point, I would say. And I agree with Keith and what he said about how we fund as well. We do take a longer term approach to funding. So our grants would be, say, over a 2-year period with milestones. And importantly, I think, is the outcome. So for us, the grants go towards a certain outcome that we want to see from the enterprise. So it's focused. So if for example, one of the grants we gave out is meant to, for example, build a new line for a certain product that will help the environment in a certain way. Then we will look at, okay, what does it take to bring this line of product into business? This is what the grants will go towards. These are the milestones, and over the 2-year period, let's work towards that, right? So the funding itself, so it starts with the funding itself goes towards building capacity to achieve that outcome. And that's one. And I think another example is, through COVID, for example, we gave out an additional funding to the enterprises as well. But again, the funding, we also ask ourselves, there are many different types of funding. There were a lot of, I guess there was increased giving in the COVID period. So for ourselves, we gave, there was direct funding as well, which went towards, distributing meals and so on. But we also put aside funding that went towards helping businesses to pivot. Whether that's in, like for some of them, we gave them funding to deploy technology to transition to a cloud business, for example, and so on. And that goes towards building capacity so that these enterprises would survive beyond COVID. So there is direct funding which is needed to meet the immediate needs, but there's also longer term funding that must go towards helping these businesses to build that capacity to last and to stay the course. So I think how we direct our funding is very important. I think that's one. The second, in terms of building capacity, I think there are different ways that we do that. So currently, for example, I would say the first thing is really understanding who your audience is. So in our case, it's focused on the social enterprises. Like, what do they need? What capacity do they need? So I think we identified at least 2 areas currently. So the first is, for our more mature social enterprises that are looking to scale and to grow, there is a real, I think, capacity need in helping them figure out human resource. How do you grow from a 10-man team to a 30-man team to a 100-man team? And I think that was a real gap that we saw. That was, I think, a challenge for them to grow. And of course, for many of these enterprises, they will look at me and say, you're DBS, you have a head of human resource, and you have MD, you have this, there are many people you have, but we don't have that. So how do we grow? So I think we actually then, some of our people from our HR department customized, some of the things that we were doing internally, into what we call a transformation leadership program for social enterprises that we ran with some of the more growth stage, enterprises, because that was what they needed, and we wanted to help them to scale, and that was a gap. The other gap that we saw, I think more generally, was, I think some of you brought this up, which is the burnout of founders, right? But the burnout, especially in the early years. So we actually work with one of our current, I would say, one of the older social enterprises that we have, a Better Barista. They actually have, they're partnering with another organization to actually do like a resilient leaders program, which really focus on mental wellness and really helping founders to last, and so we actually now run that program for all our new grantees, because we see that as a general need, for a lot of entrepreneurs, especially in this, I think, very, very trying times. So those are some of the capacity building programs that we're currently running. I mean, there are others as well, but I think the key thing is understanding what the needs are, and then thinking about what sort of resources do we have internally as a bank to run it, or leveraging the peers. I think in this case, working with Better Barista, because they also understand what the entrepreneurs need. So again, that peer learning, I think we've also seen as really important for them to encourage one another in building capacity as well, because there are a lot of things that they know from each other that actually we, even as a funder, we don't. So I think we also bring them together to talk about how they can help one another to grow as well in this, for the social enterprise community. I think the last thing just to, talk about is in capacity building is really trying to involve our employees, because I think very much, in terms of what we are trying to do, like I mentioned, is about leveraging skills and expertise of those in the bank. But we also are realistic in thinking about, like, okay, what can a corporate do? How do you leverage your volunteers, right? So one of the programs that we've run actually with Impact in the early days is what we call Done in a Day. And I think it's something that's run really well, which is where we, curate problems from our enterprises, problems that are bite-sized that can be solved in a day. But these are real problems. It could be, I need a spreadsheet for my cash flow or something like that. And we get all the expertise of those within the bank. So it's quite niche, it's quite specific as well to solve that problem. So we actually post it on what we call People of Purpose Connect, Pop Connect, a platform. It's like a classified of sorts. We post all the problems there and we get people to sign up. And because if the problems are well curated and specific, people know whether they have the skill set to solve that problem or not. And I think to someone's point also, what was interesting was through COVID, so we did it pre-COVID, through COVID we did it virtually, and we actually managed to then do it across 6 markets as well. So it became a virtual program, and it was quite interesting seeing 5 to 6 different people from different markets with complementary skills sit together virtually to solve that particular problem. So that's something that we have found to be quite effective on our side, and also and we are also very mindful also on the side of the recipient of the volunteering, which is the enterprises themselves, because they have to find it useful. Otherwise, it's a waste of both parties' time. So I think that's something we've continued to do and to grow across markets, and to do more regularly as an organization to build capacity in these enterprises. Yeah.
Thanks, Claire, and appreciate your plug for our skill-based volunteering format, Done in a Day. Yep. If you'd like to find out more, you can ask any of us from Impact. Okay, I would like to quickly turn our attention to the local social sector, right? And this question, I think I'll direct it to Fermin first. Yep. Our social service agencies, SSAs, right, face very different sustainability challenge as the one that's been predefined, right? Because I think largely a lot of our social service programs are funded by government, especially the critical or the key ones, right? And in recent years, the government has also placed a significant emphasis on building capabilities of these SSAs, right? And what Casey has mentioned just now, very much in terms of digital transformation as well for our SSAs, right? So that they can better meet emerging needs of our community, right? And NCSS, the agency itself, has also recently launched an organizational health framework, right, for social services. Right, and maybe if I could get you to share a little bit about this tool, how it's helping the SSAs to on this journey of capability development, and the role that NCSS plays in this journey itself. Thanks.
Thank you for that. On the OHFSS, which is a mouthful, the Organizational Health Framework for Social Services, what we intend to do is provide an easy guide for agencies to be able to figure out how well they're doing from an organizational health standpoint. It has 7 domains. Basically, sustainability is one of them, volunteering is one of them, people management is one of them, board governance is one of them. So some of the key items that agencies need to worry about. But most of the funding has always been around programs. And when we fund in Singapore, we tend to fund the programs. And what was obviously needed was a way to fund capability and capacity, and how to know if we are making progress in terms of capability and capacity. So the OHFSS is basically meant for agencies to measure themselves. We started some years back. We started with a publicly available online tool. We piloted it, didn't quite work. Then we tried to develop or sort of modify other existing ones that were used in other countries, didn't quite work. So in typical Singaporean fashion, we created our own. And that's what we have here. So it is self-administered, so that each agency can go ahead and get it done. What we intend to use it for, though, and because this is a key question that always comes up, what we intend to use it for is not only for agencies to help themselves, but to be able then to tap into our capability, Community Capability Trust. The Community Capability Trust, or CCT for short, is a fund that has over $400 million to be spent over the next 10 years. And this CCT is aimed at building capability and capacity specifically, so that we have funding for all the agencies to be able to come and tap into the CCT so that we can work on how to get them to improve. So the OHFSS is basically meant for agencies to do a self-diagnostic, figure out what are the areas where they need the most help, and then prepare their proposals to the CCT in terms of, here, I did the analysis, here's where I showed that I need more help. And I have this idea, this proposal to tap into the fund to help me move along. So it could be, I want to improve my volunteer management, or it could be that I want to improve my board governance, or it could be that I want to improve my HR practices. Any of the areas covered in the OHFSS. So I'll leave it to short answers because we're being summoned here.
No worries, thanks. Thanks. This is just for the panel discussion segment. We'll go into a Q&A segment after that, yes. Yeah. Okay, I'll quickly go to Casey then. Casey, as AIC is in a unique position of both a direct service provider as well as a sector developer, right, building capabilities of the healthcare and elder care sectors. Right? And recently, AIC announced your intentions to double the number of elder care centers by 2025 and expand their scope of service. Right? What, in your perspective, would be the biggest challenge to achieve this, and how would AIC sustain this in the longer term?
Thanks so much for that, Kengui. Maybe just a clarification that AIC is not quite a direct service provider. Actually, our key roles focuses on being the connector, the integrator, and helping to develop our partners. I think our direct service provision only comes about because we have an outreach arm called Silver Generation Office. And this consists of our volunteers reaching out and engaging our seniors at home, proactively identifying the needs, helping them to be linked up with programs and services available out there. So we do work through our partners very much in terms of what needs to be delivered and how can we meet the needs of seniors and clients out in the community. Maybe just a quick sort of overview in terms of what we are trying to achieve through the Elder Care Center program. You may have heard that the ministry, together with AIC, plans to roll out 220 elder care centers across Singapore. And these elder care centers are, if you will, community nodes at the local precinct level. Really being able to understand, identify the seniors in the vicinity, regardless of socioeconomic status. Being able to help to identify needs, proactively engage them in terms of active aging, or if they are at risk of social isolation, link them up with befrienders, mostly consisting of volunteers, or if they need certain care and support areas, we'll come in to support them through our partners. But if I can, actually 3 key shifts actually in terms of how we look at the provision of social services. I think particularly for the seniors in this case within Singapore and what AIC is helping to drive. Firstly is really the focus, as Claire sort of alluded to, the outcomes that we want to achieve. Very often, I think, whether it's AIC or MOH, we tend to focus on funding programs. We want to see the outputs. How many clients go through the programs? How many go through rehab services? How many are in our center-based care and places and number of days that they are there? We really need to shift, and that's our effort to start doing so. It is challenging to try to define the outcomes and to measure the impact of our work towards those outcomes. So I'll say the first key shift is really not just focusing on the programs we're putting in place and outputs through those programs, but really saying what's the outcome that we want for seniors living at home in the community. If we agree that the outcome is about keeping them healthy, helping to keep them stay active and engaged, and ultimately also fulfilling the wish of most that they want to live at home and to live in a community that they've been in, right, for the last many years, then how do we do so together with our partners? So that's one shift. Not easy, I will highlight up front. But the conversation and the discussion and also, in a way, try to assess the outcome of that is taking place through this particular effort. Second shift that's happening as well is that actually the key impact, the key leverage needs to be at the local community level. Meaning to say that actually if you really want to help care for and understand the seniors and put in place programs to actually be able to care for them, you need to go right down to where they are. At the local community level, at the precinct level, where they really are sort of living in, they have familiarity, and proximity does matter in our view for many of our seniors. So that's the second shift that we are making. Again, I think something that we're working towards, not easy. 220 won't cover the whole of Singapore. And Singapore is small, as Ruth will tell you, very small. So we do have the advantage of that in the sense of trying to extend out to the local community. But that's the second shift that we're trying to make. The third shift that we're trying to make is that it's actually not just about building capability of the providers that's involved in operating the elder care center. It is extremely critical. And what I think my fellow panel members have spoken about is extremely important. So be it in terms of human capital, incorporation of technology, looking at sustainability in the longer term. But it is also about how do we build the network of partners at the local level to be able to provide the full spectrum of care out to the seniors and the clients. There's no, in my view, one single provider that can, okay, some may argue with me, there's no one single provider can truly say they provide the full health and social spectrum of care and support areas that's required out there. In my view, it requires partnership and collaboration, and we're trying to drive that more strongly as well. How do we then measure the impact of that? And how do we encourage or be able to provide that drive and the motivation for our providers to do so? I think is where we are going. So our postulation is there needs a network of support out there at local community level. How do we build that? It requires building our trust between the provider. It requires alignment of goals. It's not just putting two providers out there and saying that let's work together. Why don't you guys henceforth go work together for the clients? Doesn't happen this way. So how do we actually build the ability to actually have be able to engender those network, those collaboration, and have it sustained over time? We feel is extremely important. And that also involves tapping on wider community support, including volunteers. So I think in the aspect, capability development and volunteer management, NCSS has done tremendously. But we are really leveraging on this effort to look at how further to build the network of support that we feel is essential to deliver the care and the social and health services out there at the local community level for our seniors going forward. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. I hope you all had a good insight into some of the perspectives of our panel members and what they're bringing, their wealth of experience and knowledge of the ground and how the sector itself has shifted as well. And thanks a lot. I'm seeing quite a lot of questions on the pigeonhole system. And if I can quickly just address this, just going back to, hang on, let me show this to you guys. All right, are you all seeing this? Yeah, I just want to go back to something that Dr. Ruth has shared in her presentation, right, about funders' trust deficit in the sector. A question was asked about some strategies that you think funders can help to overcome this. Anyone in the panel would like to try?
Okay, I'll just speak from someone who is maybe not guided by too many, I guess, stricter rules and covering. I've always felt that funders need to err on the side of being compassionate and not be looking too strictly when it comes to the issue of outcomes and the quantitative aspects, because I think we have the ability to form a view: is this service really achieving some good and some value? But as I said earlier, I think that will vary naturally. So there will be. I think we have to also appreciate that different funders, different organizations will have different expectations and standards, and I don't think those standards make a and I don't think we should be questioning those standards. In that there are probably reasons why. Certainly when you are entrusted with public funding, you have a responsibility to the public, the wider nation. So you have to have certain, basis and ways to determine whether or not this particular initiative is achieving that. I think there's greater flexibility when it comes to perhaps the private, the non-public funding avenues. Perhaps with corporations, I think you probably also do have some perhaps more. You have guidelines that you may have to follow. But I think the main thing is the relationship, building that relationship of trust, and that relationship of understanding if things are not going the way ideally, let's say, then what needs to be addressed, what needs to be changed, and I think the matter should be able to resolve itself in an amicable and hopefully positive way.
Thanks, Keith, because I think that's important. And what I would add to that is, from the point of view of the agency, what they can do is have a better answer to the question: how did this money help to deliver services? And in particular, not just to go in, and we're very good at telling stories. We are fantastic at telling stories. So we'll pick one of the people that we served, and we'll say something fantastic about, Mr. So-and-so, or, this child, or something. And we'll tell a story about somebody. What we are less good about is to say, how was this year better than last year from the point of view of the agency? And we tend to have very generic answers to that. So this year we served 300 more beneficiaries. But was the service better? Was the output better? Was the outcome better? We tend not to answer those questions so clearly. Or maybe the quality of the service was the same, but we delivered at a more efficient, lower cost. We tend not to be like that. However, in my view at least, since these funders that we're trying to attract are philanthropists, and usually they're business people like Keith, or corporations, and they are usually represented by folks like Claire at DBS, they are far more interested in hopefully showing that the money that was given had an outcome. And even if that outcome is, generically speaking, that the agency was able to deliver as much as it did last year, but at a lower price point, or more than they did last year at the same price point, that kind of idea is good for the agencies to start to follow through. So this sense of how to convey to our donors that their money was well spent because it provided an additional benefit that wasn't there before, I think it's important to build trust.
Thanks, Fermin. Maybe I want to also follow up with your point of showing the outcomes beyond just maybe doing it cheaper doing it better. But maybe for Claire to share with us, is it important then how would maybe somebody who comes to you for a grant, right, show how they're measuring their social impact, right? And how does that affect in your decision making to whether you're going to put some grant on them for the longer term? Thanks.
Sure. I mean, I think my guess is that this trust deficit is only going to grow. I think from what we see in what people, especially the next generation, what they want to see in terms of impact, I think they are going to ask more and more questions about where the money is going. So I mean, that's my view. So I think one of the things, for example, that we are thinking about, right, in terms of, say, even how we fund social enterprises, I think we're trying to put together, in a way, the best of business and social, right? So, for example, we're looking at new tools. I think some of it was talked, new funding mechanisms. Like we're looking at impact first investing, for example. How can we pull together resources to support the sector and get outcomes from that, right? Which is what I think the business sector is good at doing, is measuring things and all that. So I think there has to be a degree of measurability, even though I also agree with Keith that at the end of the day, though, I mean, you all have to align on why you're doing this, because some of those outcomes may or may not be achieved. I mean, you don't, there is a degree of risk in whatever you are doing, and if in the end it doesn't deliver, we all agree that was the risk we were prepared to take. So I think there is the degree of, yes, we want to be better at measuring what we set out to do, and some of that, I think from what we're looking at in creating some kind of a fund, for example, is to have that rigor, or to work with people who have that rigor and being able to measure, so that the people who are funding, who are demanding more and more rigor as well, would be comfortable with what we're able to achieve. I think that's one. So I think the outcomes is important, but at the same time, I also think that you also have to align on what sort of the alignment of outcomes, right? So you must all be aligned that this is what you're achieving. There is a degree of variability, a degree of risk. Is this what you're prepared to do? And I think that alignment would then enable you to come together to pull together resources to, in a way, in this case, serve this sector. So I think. So for us, for example, when we look at, like our grant programs and so on, I think we are very clear upfront, what we're looking for. So like I mentioned earlier, okay, if the grant is going towards this, then are we aligned in terms of what it takes to achieve that? And this is how the funding is going to go. So I think that alignment is important, but that. You see, our grant program right now is from DBS Foundation to, say, one social enterprise. And as we think about bringing other funders in together with us to fund a pool of social enterprises, then in a way the alignment, I think, on both sides becomes important, and measuring the outcomes also becomes important, because you're now, it becomes more complex. You've got multiple people and multiple enterprises. But that's the only way to scale, I think, the funding, as well as to scale the growth of the sector. So I think increasingly, how we measure, what we measure, will become increasingly important, as much as it is complex, especially for the social part. I think the environmental part, I think, has a lot more work has gone into that. I would be the first to admit that I think the social part, a lot more work needs to go into being able to measure that better. But we need to start somewhere, and we can't just say it's difficult, so we don't do it. So I think we need to start somewhere and improve on it, and hopefully over time we get better at doing that. Right, and of course there are internationally recognized indicators and all that we can use as well. But we need to start and get better at it. Yeah.
Thanks. Could I just also follow up with Casey, maybe? Yeah. In terms of what Claire was speaking about measuring social impact, and that it is a challenge, but it is a necessary.
Absolutely.
Evil, perhaps, right? For everybody to start and start to collect data on this. For the SSAs that you work with and you support and you develop, are there key challenges that you face, in this area?
I think, firstly, in terms of helping them to develop the capability, to be able to at least start looking at and measuring the outcomes, at least in my view, right, may not be in a very sophisticated way, but start thinking through actually what do they need, how to measure, and how do they build the capability or the capacity to do this? Because what we say, we want to focus on the impact assessment for them to be able to do so, to be accountable, to build the trust of the funder. For many of the SSAs, I would say the capability, perhaps also the focus may not be of that priority. So I thought it's important for us to do so. Secondly, I think there's also a lot of scope for us to bring parties together. So not just looking at impact at the individual organizational level. If we can pull together a partnership to really look at an area of interest and focus from the funder's perspective in terms of impact, then how do we also bring about the partnership perhaps of organizational SSAs that share the alignment, as Claire pointed out, in terms of goals, also to be on the same, in a way, platform, and therein amplifying the impact that we can have. I say this because, I do observe over COVID period, there is increased interest as well as, willingness of corporates, for example, to want to contribute and want to support SSAs, and in the space that I'm in, which is more of the elder care space, which is a good thing. But a lot of times when corporate approach us, they will say, I'm interested, I want to know where maybe the areas of needs are. Perhaps I don't understand the sector as well. Can you help to identify the needs? And can you identify partners and help them to be able to work with us, so that at least the funding relationship is a sustainable one. There's one of value, firstly to the clients, then to the parties involved, both the SSAs as well as the funder. So we have worked quite a bit with Community Foundation of Singapore in this area, right? In terms of how do we bring about in a way, partnership of corporates, philanthropy sort of partners to be able to benefit the sector in a larger way. And how do we do so? I think it's something we also learn and gain the expertise from, agency like Community Foundation of Singapore in this area. But quite clearly, I feel this is, an important way to go. So just an example, I talked about Elder Care Center earlier. Then this is quite basic, right? But we recently worked with IKEA as well as Google and philanthropic sort of trust to say, so they came to us to say, we are keen to help. Tell us, where we can contribute towards. When we took a look and consulted the SSAs, they said, actually what we want at the basic level is just to reimagine how the experience can be for our senior and our clients when they come to our centers. So that, they will not just find it engaging, they will find it a little bit wild to come to the centers. They will want to come, right? Whether it's for the programs, the services, or just to be there, as part of the community node. So it was one effort that we did, and I think, it is not just for one centers, but also how do we scale up with the involvement then of the corporate funders, but also the SSAs that are operating the elder care center. So to us, I think that is the important way that we want to really help to support this going forward.
Thanks, Casey. Okay, I just want to go to a question here. I'm showing you all on screen. Question is, how do you see, is for Fermin, right? How do you see the trend in pay in the social sector in the next few years? I think it's a bugging question.
Since you're all donors, I hope the pay goes way up so you can donate more money. Now, let me tell you the honest answer here. Pay should not be the reason people join the sectors, but pay should also not be the reason they stay away. Pay should be, as much as we can, taken off the table. The way we try to do that is by identifying, and it's going to sound a bit HR-y, but it's important to say it this way because it is important that we disentangle the idea that people that work in the sector only do it for passion. Because they still have to pay their mortgages. They still have to go fight inflation out there. So the whole idea that we are going to pay people low just because we're giving them the opportunity to contribute to society, I don't agree with that. I am quite honest with anybody that I don't agree with that. I think we need to pay fair wages, and fair wages basically means that they are able to contribute to society in more ways than in just social services. They can do it in schools, they can do it in hospitals, they can do it in other ways. So we need to keep pace with how much our competing sectors are paying. And those are the ones. Even for our HR folks or our finance folks or our IT folks, we need to go find them out there in the market somewhere. And they're getting paid whatever it is they're getting paid. Yes, we're going to give them a chance to work in our sector, but they, like I said, still need to pay their bills. So we need to make sure it's fair. How do we do that? We actually make a very extensive study of how all of the other relevant sectors are paying so that we put our pay at a par. That basically means, and this will be no surprise to anybody, the health sector over the last 2 years had a very large increase in pay because A, they hadn't done it in a long time, but B, they really proved their mettle over the last 2 COVID years. The same with education. Education had not increased their salaries in like 9 years, so they had to finally catch up. What that is going to mean for the sector is that we are also going to have to eventually catch up. This is the way market dynamics work. The fact that we're going to try to say, or not we, but some people say, oh, no, let's not do that. Let's just pay as little as possible because they should be doing this out of the love of doing it. No, because they can go do it somewhere else. What else is going to happen? We're going to continue with this trend, and thankfully for the last 7-8 years, we've been publishing our salary guidelines. For those of you that are aware of that, we are the only sector in Singapore that does that publicly. We've done it with intent, and the intent has always been that anybody that wants to join the sector knows what kind of pay to expect, so no surprises. But also with the intent of making sure that every agency knows that this is what is expected so that they can come up. 2 other things that I think are important. We have made lots of improvements. In the future, we're going to start targeting the idea of total pay, not just base pay. Our current salary guidelines are done on base pay. And the reason for that is that different sectors pay variable pay differently. We tend to pay less variable pay, and this is true because our KPIs are harder to determine. It's hard to tell a social worker how many cases you're going to do. And therefore, having KPIs around how many cases is always difficult. So we do less variable pay. And because of that, it's just going to be easy to compare apples to apples if we do total rewards comparison. But the second one, and this is an important thing one of the things I learned when I joined the sector, as many years ago as that was that the key stakeholder wasn't just the employee or just the agency. The key stakeholder in many of these pay decisions is the parent of the teenage boy or girl before they decide what field of study to enter. Because they go tell mom and dad, I want to be a social worker, mom. And the first thing mom or dad are going to say is, why? It doesn't pay. Cannot. So we have to overcome this idea. We need to make sure we get people joining the right field of study when they're teenagers. So we're trying to target at that early an age the issue that in social services, yeah, okay, you may not become rich like an IT entrepreneur could, but you will have a decent wage, you will be able to afford your BPO, you will be able to have the same life as other Singaporeans can.
So I was going to add on to Fermin's excellent reply. I thought just to add the point, while we very often focus on pay, pay is not the panacea to keep our talents within the sector. It has to be competitive, absolutely agree. And you're also absolutely correct. The Ministry of Health has invested quite significantly in adjusting pay up to ensure salary competitiveness over the last 2 years because it's overdue and we're catching up. But, I thought it's important also to highlight that we need to also focus on the other aspects that will help us to keep the talent, help them to grow, and as I always say, age well within our sector. So how do we do that? And we must work with the organization, whether the funders are also prepared to consider. And NCSS has been working a lot on that. Build up the HR capabilities within the organization. Help them articulate the employee value proposition, the investment in terms of learning and development, career pathways, because that's what are going to be critical to be able to retain and to develop the talents within the sector. So, those are important aspects I thought to highlight, which we are all working on, and not just, a single dimensional sort of focus on pay. That is absolutely important. But the other aspects, I think, would also needs to be built up, and different maturity or different level of development in terms of SSAs in that, and I think continues to need to be a focus area for us.
Thanks. I know time's running short. I just want to quickly direct one question to Keith. I think it's a very interesting question. 2 minutes left. It's showing, yes. Okay, so for Keith, I'll read it out in case you're not seeing it, yeah? What are some examples of innovative funding mechanisms that you have engaged in, explored, or that have piqued your interest?
Well, firstly, my confession, I'm a traditionalist. So, but thank you for the question, and I hope I can give you some helpful response. I gave you one example of this small group that we came together some years ago, and we looked at pooling our resources and looked at capacity building, engaging with organizations. It was a learning journey. I mean, we looked at it also as a learning journey for all of us. And not just for us, but also our families and our next generation. So so that is, I think that's one example that I would gladly share with each one here, where really anyone can, any one of us can. And I think there have been terms that have been used in past years. Giving circles, for example, has been one way to describe this, where you come together with a common interest, you pool your resources, and then you decide how to give and engage. So that's one. More recently, we tried social impact, investing in a proposal with social impact where you will get your funding support is protected to some extent if the outcomes are there. But if the outcomes are not there, then you put some of it at risk. So I think that's something that may be of interest to certain sectors, certain funders. But I want to add one third suggestion. My friend Lawrence, my good friend Lawrence, is here from Asia Philanthropy Circle, and I think that's collaborative philanthropy. That he and APC and he and the members of APC have been very strongly engaged in and collaborative with philanthropy, and that adds a very interesting dimension again, not too dissimilar from a giving circle of sorts, but here giving the collaborative philanthropy in the case of APC is not just localized but can be regional as well. And it's the pooling of resources, the financial resources, time and talents of like-minded individuals, learning from each other, learning through the engagement in the initiative, and through that, with the intention of bringing change and good to either the community or the project that we work with. I'm sure there are other examples that I'm not in a position to mention, but these are sufficiently so far. I mean, sufficient to pique my interest, if you to respond in that. Thank you.
Thank you. That's really all the time we have. It's 5 p.m. now. Time passed by in the Zoom. Could you all join me in thanking our panel members for sharing their great insights today? Yep, we have prepared a little token of appreciation for our panel members. So, and after that, could I invite Ruth yourself to come on stage and join us for a quick photo taking? Thank you.
Thank you to all panelists for your invaluable input. These tokens of appreciations are Husky cups. They're made with coffee husks and help to recycle the organic waste material from the coffee production process. You can get them from Forward Coffee Roasters, a social enterprise with a vision of empowering persons with disabilities and special needs through employment opportunities. With that, we have officially come to the end of the Singapore launch of the Doing Good Index 2022. A big thank you to all our guests for joining us today. We'd like to request for your help in filling up the post-event survey, which you can access via the QR code shown on screen. We hope that you had an enjoyable and enriching time with us, and we wish you a pleasant day ahead. May I please invite all our on-site guests to partake in the tea reception, where we have light refreshments and some light bites provided. You can also order complimentary gourmet coffee and tea from the Forward Coffee Roasters Cafe. Feel free to show them your fuller support by purchasing the other items available on the menu. Thank you.